Welcome back, everybody. This is not a Malazan video. This is a rambly one about stuff. I actually recorded it on Sunday and then I didn't post it because, things happened. But anyway, and I didn't post a video yesterday either, so there's going to be two today because, feel like it. Anyway, let's have us a talk about world building and whether it's necessary or not, or maybe we give it too much weight. So, let's do this. Cheers. So, I recently finished reading Lord of the Rings again, and I'm about to start rereading Silmarillion, and then I'll finally get to read the Unfinished Tales, which have finally come out as an audiobook, an unabridged audiobook. So I'm excited to do that because obviously I've been a Tolkien fan. I've been a fan of Tolkien's works for a long time, and then that whole thing got me thinking about world building because obviously Tolkien is often praised for his world building, and other authors are like praised for it as well. Stephen Erickson and Ian Cameron Esselmond are often praised for the world building done for the Malazan world, and well, there's others that have also been praised for it. And then I looked at some of the other stories that I really, really, really love. And one of them is obviously the Black Company series by Glenn Cook, which has like literally no world building whatsoever, or at least we never see it. And so I was starting to think about how we look at world building nowadays and how we would like whether something like the Black Company would work today if it would come out nowadays, if people would actually accept it or not go like, there's no proper world building here. We need to, yeah, I'll give this like 3 stars and no, 2 stars, and then you move on to the next YouTube booktube video. So I was trying to figure out why, like how we look at world building and whether world building is necessary to tell a good story. I firmly believe it's not necessary to do that, to have a coherent world building. Now, as I said, there are there's certainly appeal to world building, to a very deep world building, and I feel it's a different enjoyment that compared to the enjoyment of a story well told, where the plot is what it is about, or the characters are what it is about. World building scratches a different itch, and there is one point in there, and that's it scratches the itch of a active creative person in a way. What do I mean by that? By that I mean that once we read of a world or watch a movie or play a game, but mostly we come back to the game later on, when we read about a well-developed world with like lots of world building and information on the world, on that fictional world included in the book, it makes it very easy for us as readers to become active in that world, whether it's starting to write our own fan fiction or using it as the backdrop for a game, for a tabletop role-playing game or whatever. It makes that much easier than say a world that is not developed, but only there for the story and the character. And I think that with our media consumption having become much more active over the last couple of decades, I would say starting with like around us, like the 80s, 90s, and so forth, this is the reason why world building has become more appreciated, or almost like a thing we expect from our fantasy or science fiction, right? So my point being that when you look at most like media up to the 80s, I mean, it technically starts in the 70s with tabletop role-playing games, so maybe the 70s also starts this trend. My point is that before that, when you look at classic media, whether it's film or radio play, or music, or literature, or paintings or sculptures, like any kind of art, theaters, the whole nine yards, right? All of that is passive or like the media consumption is passive. We watch a movie, we read a book, we go to a museum and look at paintings, we listen to an opera, and then we take all that in, and maybe we talk with friends about our experience, but that's sort of where it ends. And that has changed with new media forms like tabletop role-playing games and computer games, which are a whole nother new type of media or type of art in a way. I sincerely believe that you can totally call some video games art, just so as you can call some, movies art and so forth. But we're not going to talk about that, like the distinction between art and other stuff and media or whatnot. My point is that computer games are expect consumer participation. It's like you have to actively play that game, do stuff, and so forth. They invite audience participation. And with the rise of the internet, like obviously tabletop role-playing games do the same, and with the rise of the internet and communication, more and more of these things have come to the front. People talk to each other, people start doing creative things, they become more they come more into the open. You suddenly have that whole community of fan fiction. I'm pretty sure fan fiction existed before the internet, but nowadays we have it, like, it's visible, it's become a major part. Audience participation has obviously also been encouraged once media companies realize that you can monetize your fan base by giving them a larger say in the matter. Suddenly you have that with movies, even like with movies where things are changed, or creative choices are, artistic choices are made according to the wishes of the fandom, which is obviously difficult, raises a lot of problems, but that's the world we're living in right now. So my point is, once we accept that audience participation has become a more important part of art appreciation, once we realize that, we can also look at the fact that maybe world fictional worlds that are built up in a proper way, that if not encourage, at least make it extremely easy to participate, be creative in that world. And that is where I think that's one of the reasons why I think that meticulously built out worlds and meticulously described worlds have become something of a favorite with a lot of people that read fantasy nowadays, whereas worlds that don't encourage that, like for example Glenn Cook's Black Company world, where we don't even have a map at all, nothing like that, because I guess nothing in that world really makes sense, because I mean, maybe Cook has like notebooks on notebooks with all the details, but when you read just the stories, you're like, they just go to another place, and we maybe get a direction, like they go north or they go south. And that's it. And there's the world doesn't really exist outside the story, because it doesn't have to, because you could tell a compelling story by just focusing on the window dressing that you need right now for that story to happen. The second bit that I feel might also have an impact on why world building has become such a big thing nowadays in a lot of fiction is the rise of further rise and success of a scientific worldview. Now, don't get me wrong, I personally subscribe to that scientific worldview. I just feel like it might be interesting to look at how that has influenced a lot of things, right? So you go back to, say, the 17th century, 16th, 17th, 18th century, with the rise of the Enlightenment and the changing of our mindset when it comes to looking at the world. And it really kind of starts with someone like Francis Bacon and his Novum Organon, and they're like, The idea that yes, we can understand the whole of the universe, figure out how it's put together, and then do something about it. The idea that you can actually understand everything, at least in theory. It's like not every single person can understand everything. That's not the point. But in theory, with enough time and effort, and probably money or whatever, with enough resources, humanity as a whole can come to understand the entirety of everything, right? That's sort of the expectation of a scientific worldview. Whereas when you look at a religious worldview, there are things we as humans, because we are limited, cannot understand. The ineffability of God, the idea of, when you look at a Christian worldview, like the fucking Trinity, you can't understand that thing. It's deliberately nonsensical in a way, and I don't, you know, um, I don't want to challenge that here, because that's not the place for it. But the point is that with the waning of a religious worldview, I mean, obviously still a lot of people have that, and the rise of a scientific worldview over time since, yeah, basically the Age of Enlightenment to nowadays, we as people have taken that in our like everyday look at the world. So when we read a novel or we watch a movie, we want to understand it. We have that expectation that if we sink enough time and brain power into it, we can make sense of it all. We can understand everything, and that's, I feel, something that on the one hand leads to people more and more expecting closure within a story, having like loose ends tied off and so forth. But it also means that we want to understand the world. We don't want to just like look at it and say, wow, this is weird and I will never understand this. No, we want the belief that behind all of this, the author who created that world made that whole world coherent and workable, just like we think our world and our universe is. And this, I feel, can make people uncomfortable with reading or watching media that doesn't do that. You know, the idea of like movies, like especially when you look at horror, for example, a lot of horror comes from not having that satisfying ending, the uncomfortability of things just ending in, you know, in nothingness basically, or in yeah, having an open end sort of thing. And we kind of lost our ability, I feel, to appreciate that lack of closure in a lot of ways over time. And I feel that inability or that uncomfortability with openness or like lack of closure kind of also spills over into our expectation that the world in which the story takes place, at least on that very, very basic point, conforms to our world. And that point being that it can be understood and it can make sense. And the world in itself is coherent and has underlying rules. Now, I would say that you don't need those. I mean, yes, you need some kind of like the idea of action, reaction, and consequences to actions, our thoughts, is something that we need in a story, you know, to build up tension and stuff like that. I get that part, but I feel it's not necessary for the world behind it. So I don't know. As I said, Glenn Cook, when he wants like flying whales, he just invents them. There's like no like complex idea of how that biology makes sense. It's like if he wants talking trees, he has a talking tree. Why not? You know. And that's something I feel that we kind of should embrace more, because it's something that you also find in at least some parts of mythology, where you have stuff that doesn't, you know, all fit in coherently, because those are all different stories that have over time been melded into a like larger complex. And once we start to impose order and structure on these things, we kind of take away something from it. So yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on the question of world building, and why I feel that we are maybe paying a little bit too much attention to coherent world building nowadays when we talk about fantasy books and talk about yeah, maybe science fiction books as well. yeah, that we place too large an emphasis on it, or at least, you know, that's how I feel about it, and maybe two different ways of why this is the case. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. If you have like any other thoughts on that, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the only one who's paying attention to world building, and I'm pissed off by it. So, tell me if you like well-built worlds. If you appreciate an open, non-well-described world, and if you think I'm completely wrong about all the things I just said. I would love to hear your comments. Apart from that, you know, like and subscribe and all of that jazz. And I'll talk to you later about Malazan. Until then, cheers.